introverts can learn to be extroverted, extroverts can learn to spend time on their own. I think that actually your capacity to expand your ability past the initial constraints of your biological temperament is something like the development of character or wisdom. So if you're an introvert by nature and you learn how to be extroverted, then that expands your domain of competence. And if you're extroverted and you learn to be introverted, the same thing. But it's almost like, imagine a distribution of introversion here, extroversion here, a normal distribution. You're set when you're young at somewhere along that distribution with some range around it. And I think what you do as you mature, if you develop your skills, is you expand that range, but you're set, the place at which you're set doesn't move that much. So, okay, so you can think about them as sub-personalities. You can think about them as frames of reference. So frame of reference would be something like, well, since you're extroverted, you value being with people. And so you're going to look at the world. For example, if you're extroverted, you come into a room like this, you think, oh, look, it's a whole field of opportunity for social interactions. And if you're introverted, you think, well, maybe I'll go sit up in the corner and hope everybody leaves me the hell alone. But so it's an a priori set of perceptual structures that you bring to bear on a whole sequence of environments. So for example, maybe you're high in openness versus low in openness. That's the creativity dimension. People who are high in openness tend to be artists and entrepreneurs. And open people will look at other people as opportunities to engage in interesting intellectual conversations. And so you can tell when you're talking to someone open, especially if they're very high in openness, because they're going to want to talk to you about ideas or about aesthetics. That's what it's going to go right away. So that's how they view you, as a source of that sort of conversation. That's how they view the landscape. Someone who's high in neuroticism, which is a negative emotion dimension, is more likely to view the world as a place of threats to be protected against, because they're more anxious and more prone to emotional pain. So anyway, so that's the frame of reference issue. So there's something about your underlying fundamental psychological traits that determine or influence at least your value structures, and they do it at the level of perception. They also tend to set your goals. So extroverted people have as one goal the opportunity to engage with other people. So extroverts love parties. They live for parties. They love to tell jokes as well. That's a very good behavioral marker of extroversion. And so because they value those sorts of things, they set them as goals in their life. Or you could say the extroversion operating within them sets them as goals within their life, depending on how deterministic you want to be about it. So their patterns of behavior, that's another, at a micro level. I showed you that sort of hierarchy of value / frames of references that ranged from micro behaviors up to high order abstractions. You can extract out personality by looking at people's micro actions as well. And one of the papers that I want you guys to read that's on the course website has to do with our investigation into behavioral markers of the big 5 traits. Yep. Maybe. We don't know exactly. I'll get back to that. At the moment, that's kind of what it looks like, is that introversion is something like the absence of extroversion. But let me explain extroversion more particularly. It'll make more sense. Okay. All right. So you can think about them as stable motivations. So for example, people who are high in agreeableness, I can generally tell people who are high in agreeableness when they come into my clinical practice and I start asking them about their biography. Because my experience has been that people who are agreeable will tell you their biography defined by relationships they've had over their life. So agreeable people are high in compassion and high in politeness. It looks like the maternal dimension. It looks like the pair bonding dimension, something like that. And so agreeable people tend to characterize their lives in terms of the intimate relationships they've had. And so those are also people who would value an intimate relationship over anything else, if agreeableness is the uppermost trait that characterizes their personality. Then, systems of values, we already talked about that a little bit. The higher you are in a given trait, the more you value certain opportunities that are associated with that trait. And so I think it's worthwhile thinking about traits along using all of those different conceptual schemes to understand what constitutes a trait. But what people are, in some sense, is a little melody of traits. Melody, not M-A-L-A-D-Y, although some people are like that, but melody like a song, where different amounts of each of the canonical traits operate to a different degree in each person, and the person that manifests themselves is the panoply of those traits as they manifest themselves in the world. And so it's actually very useful to understand your big 5 traits as far as I'm concerned. Actually, that's why I have you do that exercise that you're supposed to do for this class that helps you identify your faults and virtues. And I used big 5 terminology to help you do that. So part of the reason it's useful to know what your traits are is because it can help you figure out how you should orient your life. Like, so for example, if you're high in extroversion, you know, you've got a proclivity towards sales, for example, and you're going to like occupations where you have a lot of opportunity for social interactions and social networking. You're not going to be happy if your job requires you to sit alone for extended periods of time and work in the absence of social interaction. You're going to be one of those annoying people then in one of those offices that instead of sitting alone in their office is going from doorway to doorway, engaging everyone in conversation, right? So, and you want to be in a position that capitalizes on your traits because it's really difficult to work contrary to your traits. The other thing that's worth thinking about too, we're actually building a computer app for this, which has been about 80% done for a whole year. We've got a hypothesis that we're still working out that's supported to some degree by the relevant literature. So imagine that you're looking for a stable partner, right? So you might think, well, what do you want in a stable partner? And at least in principle, one of the things you don't want is too much mismatch between you and that person on the 5 fundamental dimensions. So for example, if you're really extroverted and you have a really introverted partner, you're going to engage in continual conflict about how much social activity the two of you should subject yourself to. And it's very, very difficult for people who widely differ on those dimensions to come to consensus, because it's not just a matter of opinion, right? It's really a matter of different, if you're looking at extremes, of really different types of people. And the thing about introverts is they just don't enjoy large-scale social interaction that much. One-on-one, they're often fine, but in a group, they don't like that, and it tires them out. Whereas a real extrovert, it's like you isolate them and they just wither on the vine, because a huge part of what actually motivates them in a positive way is tangled up with social interaction. And so if you're an agreeable person and you have a particularly disagreeable partner, you're also going to run into problems, because the agreeable person will say whatever you want, whenever, and the disagreeable person will say, well, I'd like to know what the hell you want for a change, and be much more harsh and much more demanding in the situation. And the agreeable person is going to find the disagreeable person harsh and unpleasant, and the disagreeable person is going to find the agreeable person wishy-washy and unable to stand up for themselves. And again, that's actually one of the primary sources of tension between men and women, because women tend to be higher in agreeableness than men. It's about half a standard deviation, which is quite a large difference by psychological standards.